Welcome, everyone. Great to be here today and great to have some good dialogue. It's sort of weird, right? So we're sort of getting towards the end of a lot of things, and there's like talk of live events and engagement. And one of the things I really enjoy is getting out there with Product Camp, and I've been to a number of them around the country. I help organize the Product Camp Twin Cities, so I really am a fan of this type of event, in large part because it really is, like Steve Johnson was talking about in the intro. It's an event that's about just people that are there to share, learn, and connect with each other. And so it's harder to do virtually. We're trying to do our best. So I know all the organizers are really doing a lot, and you coming here, and the more that you can engage with each other on chat and say hi to folks and help people out some way. One thing I always try to aim for when I go to any event in person is like, who are the at least 3 people that I'm going to connect with at the event and try to help them somehow during the after the event, whether it's introducing somebody to somebody else or sharing a resource with them, or maybe there's a job that somebody's looking for a job, I can connect them. So certainly take the opportunity to try to help a few people out today, and at the same time, no matter what you're looking for, come with sharing, and then you'll also get things back in return. But so today I'm going to talk about data is all around us, right? As product people, we are faced by so much data that's coming our way, and it's just getting crazier. And I think, so one of the things that years ago, I did this talk, like how to make good products great with data and analytics. And when I started doing that talk, it was really popular. I had, gave it many times, but there kept on being this mantra of people wanting to be data scientists as product people. They kept on thinking like, hey, I need to be able to do this job. And first off, I want to take anything away from that and say, nope, this is not about, how to make you a data scientist or data analyst. It's how to help you as a product person, whatever your role is, product marketing, product manager, product owner, or a director, and how to be better at being in your role, and some tips that will help you. And this is just going to be a primer, right? We have 35 minutes together in total, 25 minutes for my session. So we're not going to go deep into any of these things, but hopefully some of these things spur your interest to dive deeper into them. Each one themselves could be, not just a talk, but could be actually a course. And so let's get going there. But first, I want to give you a little background on me, because while giving you a very little bit, I want to provide a little more detail, right? And so that that, because we all have biases, we all have lenses, we all come to the world in a certain way that we see things. So a little bit about me, and I'm going to close one window there so I can see this a little bit better, is I've lived a lot of places. So I appreciate when I see people from all the different areas of the country and even the world. And I've traveled a lot more places, but these are places that I have actually lived for, whether, sometimes multiple years, sometimes just multiple months. And so certainly been in the Midwest a lot, but I've been like down in Florida and California, a bunch of places, and certainly appreciate with Product Camp being all over the place. I've been in a number of product camps. But like I say, I live here in Minnesota. And as a little bit of background with me is like, I was this dyslexic kid that sort of was always a contrarian kid, right? My family wasn't into sports at all, but yet I loved sports. And I became not just like a person that loved to do almost every sport, but also was such a big fan of it. So I always sort of was just this natural contrarian. And I wonder, like, what made me this contrarian, right? But one of the things that really does help is that curiosity or contrarianness when you're leveraging data as a product person. So a little bit more about me on that path is I actually first became an organic chemist. I actually was in a PhD program in this, right? A couple of years in, I actually got enough sense to say, this is not what I want to do, and actually then went to law school. And yes, I was an attorney. I was doing patent and trademark law, and then got into just general counsel's office, and doing typical legal stuff, and honestly kind of boring. And so that's why I found my passion, my love of product, and it's just been there since. And so product innovation started in the insurance space, and this is a picture of catastrophe. So people in Florida are like, hey, this looks very familiar. Certainly hurricanes, so did things with catastrophe models as some early products that I worked on. So again, thinking about, where your paths lead. And of course, I've done worked on many different products since. But everything that I've done is involved data. And sometimes it's been essential to the products themselves. Sometimes it's just ancillary to help me deliver the products better. But oftentimes it's actually been an essential component of the product. Now, I do like to travel a lot, as probably pretty evident already. But like I said, this is a picture of our product camp here in the Twin Cities and just a logo. So if you're ever interested and you happen to be in the Twin Cities in later fall, come check us out and maybe you'll be able to join us and even share like I am here today. So let's get in 10 tips. I'm going to try to keep this very straightforward, break it into 3 groups. 1 is understanding, 2 is trust, 3 is communication. So these are the 10 tips are broken into these 3 segments because we need to understand, we need to build trust, and we need to communicate. And those are just essential skills as a product person. So yeah, as Steve Johnson was talking about early, certainly we need to understand our market. We need to understand our customer. And we talk about this voice of the customer and all this dialogue that goes by, but what does that really mean when you're talking about data? And so one of the things that I see as a challenge here is whether there's qualitative data or quantitative data, people tend to overly index one way or the other. So you see a lot of people that are very comfortable with qualitative data. They're good at getting, doing observations, doing research interviews, but they're not doing a good job of pairing that together with other quantitative data that certainly is available and really align those. The other, of course, is the flip of that, where, well, why do I need to spend that money and time to go out and get qualitative data when honestly I have a ton of quantitative data and I can just understand everything from here? And really, one of the things you really need to build and make sure that you have in place is a great market and customer listening system that's built up of both qualitative data and quantitative data. The second part of this first tip, though, is that you need to make sure that you're leveraging this on a continual basis. It's not just like this one and done, like, hey, we need to identify if there's a market need for this product and we're going to like go out there, we're going to spend this effort and then we're going to pull back and we're going to just leverage that knowledge for time for the next 2 years and then maybe do it again. That doesn't work anymore. And certainly that in the past was happening too often, but nowadays, if you're going to be competitive, you need to have a constant listening system that requires both qualitative and quantitative data. So building that together as a product person, and of course, the context is going to completely vary based on the market you're in, but it's essential to have that. So tip number 2, and this is similar to tip number 1 in the sense that you will use qualitative and quantitative data to align with it, but it's different because customer experience is just absolutely essential as a product differentiator in nearly every industry nowadays. And certainly there's a lot of service products that are out there, and obviously that, whether it's financial services or hospitality or things like that, and obviously that's going to matter. But even, okay, so this week, next week, my license expires, my driver's license. So I was going to go into the DMV. I was going to try to schedule an appointment. Well, whoops, there's no DMV appointments for like 6 weeks in the county I'm in because of COVID, and you have to schedule ahead nowadays. I was like, okay, my license expires next week. What do I do? And so then I'm like, okay, but then I see this little thing, like you can just reapply online. I was like, awesome, this is great. I can just reapply. I don't need to go through the whole DMV process anyway. So that's great. And I go through it. I'm happily paying my money at the end, click, like, send the payment, confirm. And just like the screen goes up and says, hey, print confirmation, and it doesn't, like nothing happens. And there's no other information about it. Like when will I get my driver's license, or what happens between now and getting it if it's there, or is there a confirmation number that I can reference? Nothing was there. So I'm like, okay, I try to refresh my screen, tried it this a couple of times, can't figure it online. So I was like, okay, I'll call them. And of course, after waiting on hold for an hour, maybe an hour and a half, I'm on the phone with the Minnesota DMV and frustrated just because I was on hold that long. No estimate of like, hey, it's just going to be a really long time. So just stay on with our crappy hold music. And so I'm online. Then I clearly get a gentleman on the other side who doesn't like his job. Then basically telling me that my best advice is to just not drive until I get the license here. I was like, okay, but there's got to be a better way. Like if that's your first reaction. And this was after he had told me that, no, we don't send an email or any confirmation, but yes, we did get your application and it's went through successfully, the payment. And I was like, oh, okay. So one is to think of if they had a good understanding of that customer's experience, they would clearly know that, okay, one of the concepts in the behavioral science realm is the peak end rule. So thinking about what's that last experience that a customer has with you, and is that good or is that bad? And clearly in this case, it was absolutely horrible. And we make fun of the DMV or the government or things like that, but I saw that they're trying to make it better with this online application, but they just fell so short in such a crucial moment in that customer experience. And if they were leveraging a quantitative or qualitative data, either way, they would have, I'm sure, found this, but I'm surprised that not even having an email afterwards was disrupt. Needless to say, I was able to at least identify some places that I can drive to that do have walk-ins that I still have to do next week before my license officially expires. At least I'm hoping I'm hoping it doesn't run into any issues. So that was tip number 2. That's a little bit of a doozy, but I wanted to give a little story around just something that happened recently around this. Certainly we all have blind spots. We all have blind spots because we're human, right? And we all have blind spots because we have different experiences. And so we're coming at the world in very different ways. And so we just have to understand, like, we have blind spots and how to alleviate those blind spots. And part of it is, even when we have really good qualitative and quantitative data, oftentimes we still have blind spots. We'll say, okay, we'll really understand our market, or we'll really understand, our region, or things like that. And we'll quickly then say, okay, well, we want to just assume that because we know our customers so well, we have great data, we're just going to transcend and put this into another market, and while it's going to be successful, we know that just doesn't work that way. So one of the things to think about as a product person is always having a Bayesian mindset. And what I mean by Bayesian mindset is that you're always updating your decisions and your predictions based on new data. So you have to come out with an initial prediction, but then you have new information that comes in that updates it. And so building in a mechanism that allows you to quickly adjust and not be overconfident, over predicting right at the beginning. You're trying to have that good initial step, but then also what's that mechanism that's coming in that's constantly updating that decision process and what your predictions are. And so that will help you alleviate the blind spots. Another concept, another thing that I use with clients is the Johari window. And so Johari window dates back into the 1950s. It's actually by a couple of psychologists that their names make up Johari if you put them together. And it was famous back in the early aughts with Donald Rumsfeld referencing it with the known knowns and your known or your unknown unknowns, right? So there's what you know and what you don't know, or what you're not certain about. And then there's also your customer and what they know and what they don't know. So it's really understanding from a data perspective, what do you know and what don't you know, and what things about your customer don't you know, or do you know, or your market, are just essential. And leveraging something like Johari window is a great way to go about doing that. Baselines. Wow, there's so many baselines. But at the same time, they're actually one of the best things as a product person to really get good impact, right? So you can find quick wins, higher ROI if you have good baselines. So when I talk about baselines, and of course I have a tennis reference here because the French Open is going on. I'm a tennis fan, is one of the sports fans that I am, and I like to play tennis. And so the French Open's going on and they use clay courts. So I saw this picture. I was like, oh, what's a very timely picture. And so when you think about baselines, like whether it's something like churn or open rate, or, there's a whole plethora of baselines that you may have. And there's baselines where you're going to look at what your baseline is, but you're also going to look at, like, what's your industry baseline? What are competitor baselines that you can identify? Because the easy way to check things is to say, okay, where are our baselines compared to the industry, compared to competitors, on things that we can quickly, because if it's been solved and done by somebody else, odds are it's going to be much easier for you to redo and learn how somebody else did it, and bring yourself up to at least par, up to average on those things. And so understanding where you're below your baselines can be a great way from a quick win from an ROI perspective. And so, but that requires that you understand what baselines matter for yourself. And also, of course, then understanding where your baselines are versus your competitors and your industry. So another tip around leveraging data. Of course, we're going to move now from understanding into trust, because as a product person, we're always trust builders, or we're hopefully always trust building, because if you're not trust building, you're probably doing the opposite and you're not going to be trusted. So and that's any professional, of course, but product people, as having to influence without authority, your trust in you, whether it's your trust by your customer, whether it's your trust by your colleagues, your engineering team, your finance team, your sales team, it's really essential to be a trust builder. And so when you think about building trust, there's a few tips that I'm going to go through here. One is built by following principles. So when you think about this as respects data, identifying what your data principles are. And it seems a little strange, but I think a lot of companies are struggling with this. They're really struggling right now of, do we want to be the company that's highly ethical and very transparent in how we're using data? or do we want to get more clicks, or we sell more widgets, or whatever it is? And having those principles that are consistent across the different groups that you work with, and also how, and when no one's looking and your customer doesn't know, are you following that, is just essential. So one of the things I encourage people to do, and if you want to check out a really good video that might spur some at least humor, but also I think maybe challenge your thinking of the workplace, is look at Ray Dalio, because he had a couple books that came out around principles and what he had done professionally and also personally. And he's a pretty famous person in the investing space. And if you look at 60 Minutes on YouTube and you look Ray Dalio principles, you're going to find I think it's 6, 7, 8 minutes. I forgot how long it is, but it's a really interesting video on how they use data in the workplace and their principles around using data, for example. And obviously they're the extreme of extremely data-informed decisions, and they have a very lots of data collected in the workplace to make those decisions. But at the same time, thinking about how you as a product team, how you're with your UX team, with your engineers, with your finance people, what are the principles that the organization is going to have around data? And of course, working, if you have a chief data officer or CIO or CTO or somebody like that, working with them to understand, is there something that's already some principles that are established, and make sure that you're aligned with that organization's principles. Okay, tip number 6, trust is built by being data informed, not data driven. And so this is a nuanced concept, but data driven people are people that are reacting, right? They're people that see like, oh, this came up, I need to just react to it. Or they see the data and they're like, okay, this metric says this, so I look at it blindly. No, I mean, you want to be data informed. You know that you have principles, you know that there's policies, you know that there's unknowns. So by being data informed, you're taking data in, you're taking information in as a product person, but you're not just blindly looking at it. And I think organizations tend to over index, where they'll just like take metrics and they'll just like follow them blindly, or else they'll basically just ignore data. So it's one of those, it tends to be one or the other. But as a good product person, if you really want to excel, being data informed and thinking how this fits with everything else to then come up with those decisions. And so the other thing, now this again is, if I'm a curious person, and so I like to read interesting books and learn interesting things and apply it to my life, and whether it's personal life or professional life. And one of the things, James Carse had come out with a book, Finite and Infinite Games, back I believe in the 1980s. And it's a really good book, recommend it. But when you think about it, when you're applying it to being a product person, you think of a finite game being like chess or tennis or other things like that. But the question, and your product in large part probably is a finite game, your individual product. It's probably going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And there's some success metrics from a product perspective, but thinking about yourself as a product person and how you treat data and how you just treat yourself professionally, you want to be thinking about things from more of an infinite game approach, thinking of, or some might term it the long game. And so when you do this, you're not making short-sighted decisions that don't think about the future and how that's going to impact you. You're not like, okay, well, I'm not going to be here in 2 years, so screw it. Like, this will be somebody else's problem. Like that's never a good thing to do, because things tend to haunt you when you do that. And so tip number 8, then, while I say don't blindly follow metrics, we're moving into communication side. Metrics are important, targets are important, and there's something that people understand. They're a great way to communicate with data. But when you do this, you need to be careful not to be constantly changing the numbers, constantly changing the metrics that matter. And so when you're using metrics, you need to have some consistency with that. And then the second thing, as part of this, is you need to communicate the why, or at least help people understand the why around the metrics and the targets, so that you're not just saying, hey, this is what you have to hit, just do it. And I think oftentimes we're really busy, but so we don't go that last mile and help that understanding, but really helping people understand will oftentimes alleviate less work in the long run. And so thinking about those two things is, one is that consistency and focus level of communicating with metrics and targets, but 2, as part of this, is not just now I'm slipping my mind, not just changing things around, and also communicating the why around those metrics. Okay, tip number 9, because I know I'm running probably short on time. Communicate with stories. So you're going to listen to this session, and you might download the deck and maybe save it off there somewhere, and you say, oh, this is good. Like, yeah, I know a lot of this, whatever, but I'll file it away. But the thing that you'll probably remember more than anything is maybe my DMV story, because honestly, stories are what we tend to remember. I I'm horrible at remembering. Anyone that shows me data, tells me data, like I just don't remember like metrics worth the life of me, even though I work with data all the time. At the same time, I do remember stories. And so when you're communicating with stories, I have a book coming out later this year around data storytelling and translation. Is a big part of that book is not about just okay, thinking about the data as part of it, it's the storytelling part. And so thinking about you're communicating, it's a person communicating with another person, oftentimes about a person or about a story that's relatable. And so thinking about putting your stories forward in that mantra and having emotion. And it's not bad. You're trying to influence. You're not just trying to be stale and have zero. You're going to have a bias. You're going to have a lens. And you might want to communicate that bias or that lens. But you, at the same time, you want to get somebody to act. You want somebody to do something. You have a great product that you think will be better for that customer. You need to communicate that story. And of course, marketing people are really good at doing storytelling. But at the same time, more product people in general, I think, would benefit from really putting a little more effort. And everyone can be a storyteller. So don't let people say, hey, it's just a natural skill or something. No, everyone can be a storyteller. And so it's just working on what that authentic storyteller that you are. And so just practicing. And oh yeah, here's a data storyteller playbook that it's 7 or 8 pages. Again, I'm not collecting emails or any of that stuff. If you want to download it, great. I won't have any idea. Again, I try to respect people's privacy, just like I hope people respect mine. And so just if you want to download it and share it, it's not a big deal. And so moving on to, this is not the last because it's the least important, but it's certainly from a communication standpoint, when you're talking about data, leveraging visuals. And so, man, like data is tough to understand, but we're visual. We oftentimes understand things visually. And so when we see a map, we understand like, oh, okay. Or we see a bar chart, things make sense. And so you can take really complex data and help people understand by leveraging visuals. And obviously there's tons of courses, and if you're interested in learning more about this space, or I could tell you 1,000 tools and books and other things that I'd recommend around this, but certainly leveraging visuals in a way that not only is for yourself in your company, but also in your product. One company that I really like is Fitbit. And so I don't know if anyone else, I'm sure many of you use Fitbit, but they use some good data visualization. And I'm pulling up my app right now. They use some good data visualization in their product. And certainly over the years, I've seen a change in different forms, one way or another. But man, they've really thought how the combination with their data visualization, their app, along with their notifications, along with their notifications on my wrist, but also the notifications like in email, everything sort of packages well together. So, so recommend thinking about, do data visualizations play a role in your product, and or are you just doing eye candy? Because all too often, so many people are using data visualizations in their product, and it's simply eye candy, but nothing that's really meaningful for your client. Okay, so those are the 10 tips, and here they're all on one page. If you, for of course the slide shot, if you're looking for one page, and then I always am a fan of continuous learning, after all, and I think you are because you're here at Product Camp. So here are some recommendations, and these are either directly data related or they're tangentially data related one way or another. But here's some blogs, some books, some podcasts that I would recommend. So certainly I tend to be a big podcast fan. And so these are all ones that I recommend. But then, I just actually read this book. It's recent, but it's an old book. It's a 1950 something book, right? And I was like, wow, how timely is this book still today? Because they've simplified it in a way that I think, and I did a tweet or something like that, excuse me, on this, where I said that every high school student should leverage this How to Lie with Statistics, because I'm like, oh, this, even though it was written 70 years ago, it's done in a way that's very approachable, very meaningful use cases. And so I think that is it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the other view that I have and just take any questions that may come up in chat. And then I'm okay with either way, and I'll leave it up to the session moderator. If he says, hey, share your video or your audio if you want to chat, or he can repeat the questions, I'll leave it up to Blake.
Great, Dave. Thanks for that. That was really insightful. That's some good stuff. One of the questions that came up, this is from Chris Wenzel, was we saw a list of books, and I guess, can you show us, I don't know if you can show us that slide again real quick, just so we can see kind of what you recommend you're reading. I'm not sure if I'm going to get a chance. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. Great. So for all those who are wondering, Chris and others, like these are all the things that Dave recommended looking at. We can hold there for just a second. Actually, we can do this while you're talking if you like. But Chris also asked, when evangelizing internally within the company, like with customer stories, those can, in your experience, like do those work well? Customer stories. He mentions that for him, those have worked
Mhm.
well.
Yeah, certainly customer stories always work well. And you just have to make sure that when you look at, so customer stories can be overwhelmingly work well. And that's why I emphasize the tip number 9 around storytelling, right? But I think one thing I just be careful about, because I see it done all the time as product people, is we glob on to the customer story that we want, but not the customer story that the data also supports, in the sense of that that this is a broad, we can cherry pick stories. So we just have to be careful that the story you're picking is one that is also representative of, what's good. And I think not just like what people want. Unfortunately, I feel like I see the former too often. So, but you're
Got it.
exactly right. Storytelling, customer stories, and in fact, if as a product person, the more that you can record those stories actually in the field, capture a story from a customer and like literally have it in their words, right? I mean, have your iPhone or Samsung or whatever out and record a nice customer story, and very authentic. That kind of that's a great thing, and bring it back to your engineering team, bring it back to your marketing group, bring it back to others. Like those are, don't just have it your words, have it their words too.
Great. Diane also asks, can you think of the data visualization tools that you recommend for ease
Mhm.
of use and flexibility? What do you recommend?
Yeah, and so there's so many tools out there. So first thing I will say is whatever tool works that your organization has and has support for, they've all gotten so similar, but from a tool that I think is very intuitive. So if you're a former Excel person where you used Excel a lot, you're very comfortable with that. Obviously, I'd say Microsoft Power BI is a very intuitive tool for people that are used to working in a spreadsheet and understand that. Certainly, Tableau is a very intuitive tool to use, from creating nice looking visualizations. Not as great in the preparation of data. So one of the things we didn't talk about, and I always debate putting this as a tip, but it goes across all these tips, is garbage in is garbage out, right? So if you have garbage data, you're going to have garbage analysis and garbage everything around it. And so one of the things that oftentimes requires is to identify those outliers or things that are maybe out of whack with data, and it depends on how good your data is in the organization, but almost everybody has not so great data, and there's always so Power BI and Excel and some of those have really good tools for that, and other tools do too. But Click is really good, Domo is really good. But then honestly, Google Data Studio, I mean, which is a very, like, they have a very good free version of that. There is a couple of tools out there. I'm always horrible with names, but if you shoot me an email, I will find it. There's a couple really easy tools to make maps, for example. So one of the things is, like from a free, create a nice map, because mapping is oftentimes a very intuitive way to communicate with people. Of course, it sort of depends on, again, is like, how you're using it and what complexity it is, but there's a couple really good tools out there for that.
Great. Um, Another thing that came up was, you know, Chris asked, of the tips that you've shared, which do you think has the biggest compounding effect? To put it another way,
Mhm.
which should a product manager start building them, start with, basically, start building muscle with?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it sort of depends on where you're starting out, right? So certainly like baselines is something I think it's a very easy thing to, because I don't think any of these that you're like, okay, like you have to be good at communicating. So certainly like if you're struggling, depending where, just like I'm talking about baselines, it's like where you are versus where you should be, or where your competitors are. When you think about yourself and your skill set now, that's where I would sort of approach it. So if you think you're just really bad at one of these things where you can quickly make some strides, like that may be a good thing. But also, like, oftentimes when you talk about from a delivering end customer value, I find that oftentimes really understanding baselines and understanding where those where there's gaps really helps a lot in organizations, because you can quickly identify, like I said, those quick win opportunities. But of course, that means that you have a good understanding of the baselines in your organization, and it sort of, depends on how heavy of legwork some of that stuff's going to be.
That makes sense. One other question that came up, and a quick note, we've got about 5 minutes left.
Mhm.
So if you all have any questions, be sure to get them in. This question is, what tips do you have in telling stories to executives? A lot of times they require really concise and clear presentations.
Yeah, and so there's a couple ways to do this. One is my approach is always you gotta get people's attention, right? So when you get their attention, how do you get their attention? You have to think of your audience, right? Your audience, what does that executive care about? So when you're talking to somebody in finance, what does that finance person, what are the things going through their head? And oftentimes one of the approaches that I've found most useful is when you have big meetings or big presentations or something coming up, is to have those pre-meetings, those pre-presentations or preview presentations with others. And sometimes it might be actually a sit-down meeting. Sometimes it might be, hey, I wanted to preview this and get your input on this and get any questions you have ahead of time. And so oftentimes, like though that's a good tip to really help in that case. But oftentimes you have to have that 60-second elevator pitch. Like, why does that person, if you're going to get their attention, what is something that they care about, that they want to have that meeting? So if you're not able to deliver that 60-second elevator pitch, whatever you're looking to talk to them about, well, you're going to struggle. So when you think of the storytelling aspect, there's get, keep, and compel. So those three stages. And so you have to be able to get their attention. And oftentimes that elevator conversation or that short email or whatever it is it has to get that next thing. Because honestly, they're not going to, like you say, they're not going to give you much attention. But again, they don't care about what you care about. So you have to know what they care about.
That makes sense. I actually had a question.
Mhm.
You talked earlier about being data informed but not data driven. And I wonder if you could talk about what's an example of like a case where there's a real risk if you are led around by your data rather than like letting it inform your decisions.
Yeah, and I didn't make my joke. Thanks for reminding me. I should have added a joke in here because I was going to say we don't want Watson as a product manager, right? So, or at least I don't want Watson as my product manager. But I do want. So when I think of, oftentimes we see things when we see data. If you're a person that's data driven, when you get data, so let's say you're looking at email, like you're doing email campaigns or some type of marketing campaign that's out there, right? Like we do a lot of, there's a lot of data around marketing, right? And we just see the open rate, we see the click rate, or we do some A/B tests or things like that. But oftentimes we have a hard time because we're so busy. We're like, okay, well, we did these three tests, but oftentimes we may be missing, like, did we do the right test in the beginning? And so spending more time thinking about from an experimental design perspective, it's less about, and I think just like user research or any of these things, right? You got to spend the time up front. And so thinking about what are the right experiments and what are the things that could go wrong, and you're designing that up front as much as possible so that your outcome is going to be as hopefully as good as possible that you can interpret and use in your information. But like, of course, there's recommendations to say, well, you like somebody that's a devil's advocate, that's a real devil's advocate that you can bring into the room and really tear apart the not someone that's like a fake devil's advocate and just trying to play the part, but somebody that really is respects to your thing. It's good to have those countervailing thoughts. Of course, you need to when you think about when you're presenting data, when you have it in a group, you need to have not just like the highest paid person. We know that's the case, but so many groups are so bad at that, and I've worked with so many customers that are honestly, that's still the natural tendency. Well, let that person speak first, or that person, what they say matters most. And so really creating a conducive environment that allows that engagement, and of course that empowered diverse team, really picking apart any analysis needs to be happening. But hopefully that same empowered team is and diverse team is actually helping design the experiments too. Not that it's just like, hey, one person's doing this and then the results are at the end or have that.